Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today we are going to look at the so-called boring technologies and discuss some of the benefits and drawbacks of working on what's already been proven and well understood. If this is your first time at a CTO Craft Bytes event, let's just tell you a little bit more about the group. So CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders all over the world, and they focus on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are currently over about 5,000, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events just like this one. Big thanks today to the headline partner, AWS, for making these Bytes events possible. I am going to be hosting for you today. My name is Emma Hopkinson-Spark. I'm the Chief of Staff at a consultancy called 101 Ways, and I specialise in coaching and transformation. Today, we are joined by John Topper, Sara Hale, and Sarah Stevens. John, why don't you kick us off with some intros?
Sure. I'm John Topper, founder, CTO of The Scale Factory. We're an AWS consulting partner based in London, specializing these days mostly in helping SaaS businesses do better with security and compliance on the AWS cloud platform. And I guess my take on boring technology comes from the fact that I've made a career out of mopping up after people who should have chosen it. I'm going to pass over to Sara Hale.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Sara. I'm Director of Engineering at Unity at the moment. So I lead a globally distributed team of around 70 engineers, and we're focused on creating the next generation of gaming services. So a suite of products that help our customers build, run, and operate live games. So basically all the things that allow game creators focus on building games rather than all the plumbing. We take care of that. Before that, I've held a variety of roles. I started out learning how to make accessible websites at Yahoo. Then I moved to a digital agency, lots of battling Flash and some C#. Then I moved into an ops role at Skyscanner. I moved up the IC track to principal engineer before switching to the management side. And I've held a couple of director of engineering roles now. I'm really passionate about tech and building high-performing teams that develop brilliant products. And I think that so-called boring tech is a really important part of that. So I'm excited to be having the discussion today.
Cool.
Sara?
Yeah. So I'm the CTO and co-founder over at Restless. We've been going since, we're a small team, we've been going since August 2018. We're a social impact business that aims to help and inspire the over 50s to get more out of life. Previously, I'm a software engineer, C# .NET mainly, and a technology leader in the finance sector. So I'm working small scale these days, but much bigger corporate size previously. In addition to that, I've got a real passion, an entrepreneurial passion, having previously started and exited a cocktail service business. So something a little bit different there. I guess my take on boring technology, if you want to call it that, is that you want to just use something that's going to give you the best chance of success.
Cool. So for everyone else that's joining us watching today, there is a chat window. I can already see people saying hello. And do feel free to ask questions as we go as well. You'll see a button down the bottom to go and pop any questions, and I will ask them to the panel as we go. And okay, let's just kick off. Then we've all kind of got that take of why you love boring tech so much, or why we think it's important. Why don't we kick straight into what we even mean by that when we say boring tech? Because I saw the title for the event and I thought, wow, that sounds really brave, really cool title. What does that actually mean then? So why don't we just start right there? If someone wants to jump in, what do you think? What is boring tech?
I really struggled with this one actually on what is boring tech. I went through the whole maturity state graphs. Is that what it is? It's not a timeline kind of thing. And I came to a view of it really depends on kind of, for me anyway, perspective and context. Like, what's your perspective on what is boring tech? If so I consider maybe what we're doing not bleeding edge. We're using serverless microservices written in Node. But if you're working in a bank and you're on spreadsheets, an achievement to get off of that would, to go to those serverless microservices might be bleeding edge. So that's on the term of perspective. But then in context as well, if I said to people, come and work on our WordPress stack, that might be considered boring, not to me, but that might be considered boring. But if I'm saying, hey, come and help us figure out how we scale WordPress and how we break it out so that we can serve 1 million sessions a month. That's a little bit different. So I really struggle with boring tech as a context.
Okay. How about yourselves then, John, Sarah?
So I guess my perspective is that boring tech is the stuff that works, right? It's the stuff that's been proven to work. It's been around long enough that the rough edges have been filed off. Documentation is complete. It's got monitoring hooks. If it's a data service, for example, it can handle security considerations like encryption and identity management, that sort of thing. So it's stuff that's hit a particular level of maturity and has done so through having been used in the market by a wide number of perhaps foolhardy early adopters. Essentially, it's the stuff that if it goes wrong, the way to find out about how to solve that is to go and search on Stack Overflow and find answers rather than busting out a debugger and actually getting into the code and trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I guess similar to what John and Sarah have already said. So for me, boring tech is boring in the sense that it's well understood. So it doesn't necessarily mean to me that it's like something that's been around forever. I think it again can depend on your context and the engineers that you're working with. So basically, a tech stack that allows you to leverage the expertise from others, be that within your company or in wider communities like Stack Overflow, even Twitter, all that kind of stuff. But basically tech that allows you to focus on solving the customer problem. I think one of the things that really motivates me is the fact that customers ultimately don't care about fancy architecture or fancy bleeding edge tech. It's very much about, are you building a product that delights and solves their need? So I guess anything that helps you do that might be considered boring in my perspective.
Okay. Are you going to name tech for us, or how controversial would it be to be able to say,
That's a really good question. I guess I don't really know. I think for me, what was quite fascinating was watching the transition of C# at Skyscanner was really cool and exciting. We were a C# house, and that transitioned into being very boring and old and very uncool whilst I was there. And that's a well-established language. It's got lots of pros going for it, and yet things like I guess challenger languages like Golang and all that kind of thing sort of came about. And actually, I found that transitioning to Python didn't allow me to do what I just said about delivering that product with a great level of quality, because we were sort of playing at Python and it wasn't as strong and stable and robust as the C# equivalent that I made.
I think you make a good point there, Sarah, about playing with these things actually, and how much time and budget are you willing to give up to play with these things, because that's what it very much can be. Certainly in startup land, we don't have the luxury sometimes of a big budget and a lot of time. So I think that can often make us go down the route of, like you said, Sarah, what skill set do we have in-house? What is going to achieve the business value and the business output that we actually need to do with the best budget fit and the time constraints that we have?
So I guess a good example of stuff that is now boring, things like Postgres and MySQL, they're kind of databases that have been around forever, essentially, certainly for as long as I've been building systems, and they're still being developed and they still have new features added to them, but they're still essentially the same kind of sensible, boring pieces of technology that they have been for a number of years now, and they are mature, well understood. The performance characteristics are understandable and measurable, and all that kind of stuff. So I think things that have been around for a long time tend to become boring, I guess, is the thing. Like they accrete the sort of characteristics of boringness as they go sort of by necessity, because people are using them, and the stuff that is a little bit too exciting that maybe doesn't take off never really sort of gets those characteristics and sort of fades away. And I think databases are a good example of this, because they're such a sort of underpinning thing. And to Sarah's point, which I can say a lot today because we've got two Sarahs, to Sarah's point, the customer doesn't care where their data is stored typically. I mean, in a regulatory environment, the customer is going to care that it is stored in a particular secure way, but the actual technology used isn't that important. So when things like MongoDB came about, when that was first kind of getting popular on Hacker News and so forth, that was an exciting technology, and by that we mean it didn't work properly and wasn't secure, didn't have any access controls. And now today, several years in, MongoDB is a mature technology and has all of those. You can make guarantees about it keeping the data, which was never possible until sort of 6 years into its existence. And so those data stores now are all pretty stable to some extent, and are probably a good choice if you want to keep your technology choices boring. Have an easy life in the place where you're storing your data, which, in my view, you should want.
So is it almost like a badge of honor for a tech to become boring, because then you know that it's safe and it's reliable and it's stable, and is that kind of how it works?
I would say so. I think that's probably fair. I think the challenge with that is that the reason we're using boring, which is kind of a pejorative term a lot of the time, or a pejorative word, is that in the tech industry we're not interested in boring stuff, right? We want to chase the shiny. We are inclined towards novelty, and part of the reason that we got into tech in the first place was because we were, tinkering with things and wanted something new to play with, and so we sort of had this maybe collective instinct to want to look at new shiny things and ignore the boring stuff, and I think we do that at our peril sometimes.
Yeah,
I think customers don't. Go on, Sara.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think sometimes we chase the novelty a bit too much, and at the expense of users first, or the customers that we're trying to delight. I think a lot of people can also fall into the trap of just picking a technology because it's popular. So it is the latest fad on Hacker News, and you want to be like, oh yeah, I'm using this. I mean, I remember when jQuery became, the best thing since sliced bread, and I would say possibly it doesn't, with all the Challenger JavaScript libraries that pop up, every 10 seconds, perhaps it's now considered uncool and boring. But I do think there's a lot of pitfalls we can easily fall into when we try and just pick a technology because it's cool, rather than thinking about, does this solve my constraints and my context and my needs.
So is it shiny things that people are looking for? Is it a learning opportunity, I guess, is what they're actually looking for? And so with boring tech, can we actually instead provide, kind of sell it on, if I'm looking at how I'm going to entice new engineers or the people to join my team, is it the learning opportunities rather than, here's this shiny new tech that we have? I wonder. I
guess maybe in some cases. I mean, I'm certainly motivated by learning new things, and so it doesn't matter to me really if I'm learning something novel or something that's been around for a while. But I think there's definitely a tribalism, and I think that the sort of the following of fashion is a kind of difficult thing. I actually have a talk that I give on choosing boring technology, essentially, and my slide about how dangerous fashion is contains pictures of Crocs and global hyperculture. Not everything that's fashionable is in any way good, and so I think that the question is, what are you optimizing for? And I think often the engineers at the coalface are not given by us as managers enough context to optimize for the right things, and so the things that they optimize for are popularity, want to try this new thing. Sometimes they're optimizing for what I call the mean time to hello world. So how quickly can I get something up and running? And things like MongoDB were great for that, because you could just download the thing and run it and connect straight to it and start putting data in it without worrying about things like data schemas or passwords or anything like that. So by optimizing for the mean time to hello world, you're probably also kind of optimizing away from things like security constraints and governance and that sort of thing. So I think we need to be careful about how we contextualize what we're doing with a team, and try and avoid the kind of the fairly common, in my view, situation where one individual who is usually a man in his 20s, who has a lot of spare time and doesn't have a family and all sorts of other things, who is advocating really strongly and passionately with sort of quite a lot of charisma for, we absolutely have to be doing this thing because that's the way that the technology is going in the future and so forth. And we need to be a bit more credulous of those individuals and maybe provide them with more of our business context. And often the business context is, we would like our data to be safe. We don't want to lose transactions or things need to be encrypted at rest, or other things which are not always the first class considerations of a new platform.
There are a few questions coming in from the audience around this, actually, and it's like, I guess you said customers don't care about the tech stack they're using, but developers do, actually, which can lead to some hiring problems. So just an example, I think Reese has said, so whilst leaders often see the value of boring tech for lots of reasons already discussed, more junior people are concerned about having boring CV or and are far more driven to experiment. So how do you reconcile that? It's the kind of thing you've been touching on already. I think there's also one very similar. If I scroll down, so Neil says, how does that boringness play a role in choosing a stack versus finding new developers when you're hiring as well? So any particular thoughts in that direction?
I think that's a really sort of valid point to bring up, and effectively it's hard. I would say it's a balance. So some of the things we try and do at Unity to sort of strike a balance between, making sure we're delivering and we're doing that in a safe, predictable way is by having things like hack weeks and game jams and all that kind of stuff, where you can time box effectively those experiments and also do it during work time rather than sort of encroaching on people's life or personal time, because I do think having a work-life balance is important. And then trying to balance your CV, I think, again, it depends on, I guess, what are you optimizing for in your career? The environment that I like to create is try and give people a sense of purpose and motivate them via that, and having, a good culture to work and environment to work in, and things where they find the problem space interesting. And so therefore, it doesn't necessarily mean that the tech stack itself has to be interesting, but is this an interesting problem that we're all collectively trying to solve? And I think, that's worthy for putting on your CV. It doesn't have to be the buzzword bingo that I think, again, junior developers can quite often get caught up in.
I totally agree with you, Sarah. And in addition to that, I think sometimes like innovation can get tied up with new shiny technologies, and it's important to make a distinction there. Like innovation is really about your process and your culture. You can use whatever you like to innovate with things. So that's the only thing I'd really add there.
Yeah, completely. I think, quite often it's easy to go, well, I'm being innovative because I'm using a new, bleeding edge technology. Whereas actually it's like, what about the problem you're trying to solve? Is that not being innovative? Are we not being disruptive here? So in some ways it's the narrative that you say or put around like your boring tech choice. But I think, sorry, Joe.
No, continue.
Oh, no, I think I'm done.
Okay, so I think that there's a question you have to ask yourself as a business about where you are in your life cycle and on your product life cycle, and there's many of you will have many of the people listening will have heard of Wardley Maps. What's this? A meantime to Wardley Maps of 17 minutes. The Wardley Map view is that you have in any sort of technology landscape, you've got pioneers, settlers, and town planners. And this sort of maps to the crossing the chasm view of product, where pioneers are sort of pre-chasm, and then you cross the chasm into the kind of early majority or late majority area. And at that point, you are in settling mode. And then later on, you become town planners. And the model here is about where your novelty goes. So if you were building some brand new platform, new product offering, never before seen by anybody, right? Completely novel. Then you want to be pioneering. You want to be using things that give you a business differentiation in some fashion. And so the place where you put your time and energy should be in that sort of novelty. Whereas there are some parts that make up your product offering that are not connected to the thing that you're doing as a business that is pioneering. And in the case of those technologies, you shouldn't be also pioneering in that landscape, because you're going to be burning engineer hours on, I don't know, building a database. So why are you building a database? Just use a database. And in the town planning kind of landscape, that's your sort of Amazon, AWS situation, where they're taking existing products like the Elasticsearch products and like their sort of MySQL products and so forth, and making them commodity and making them just work, so you can forget about all the details of how they're operated. So the message really is that if you are innovating, if your business is an innovative business, then you probably need to have people on your staff who think innovatively, and they should be pointed at innovating in a direction that is influencing your product outcome, but not at the things that are data storage and the sort of the nuts and bolts and the boring. if you are not an innovative business, let's say you are WordPress.com, right? WordPress.com is taking an existing WordPress, like WordPress has become a popular platform. At the point at which you are WordPress.com, you are now making that run solidly and predictably. You're essentially making WordPress commoditized or boring or stable, whatever you want to call it. You don't want to be hiring people who are motivated really by innovation, because that's not what you're doing as a business. And if you have people who are that way inclined in your organization, then you're probably going to get the wrong results from them. So I think you have to ask yourself, do I want a staff made up of people who are desperate to innovate and use new shiny things, or would they be happier somewhere else because their desire for that doesn't align with your business values? And I think that's an important question to ask as an owner of a company or a leader of a business.
There's a part there that I was like, oh, maybe it's a bit around the innovation. Like, I still think that you could have innovative people that can add value to your business that are not attracted to shiny new things. Actually, I still think you can have that.
One of the questions that's come up, and a couple of people are voting for in the list here as well, which is still around this. So it's probably, I think, already answered a little bit in what you said, but interesting sort of angle into it as well. Asked by Alexandra says, there's a current trend towards tooling which is focused at developer experience over other goals, which is kind of what you've been talking about. And do you feel this is good or bad for enabling engineers to build good software?
Yeah, so I've actually led a few of these teams in Skyscanner. That's where I ended up moving towards and sort of creating a team that was very much focused on effectively developer experience with an indirect application to our end users. And I guess similar to what I'm doing now at Unity, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is focusing on that developer experience, because we're all about enabling creators to focus making their game. So it is sort of more of the plumbing angle. And I think here you want to make sure that you are optimizing for reliability, robustness, scaling, and with your developer as your user. But ultimately it goes back to my original point of, like, even if a developer is your customer, they still don't really care about the fancy architecture or the specific language. What they care about is the output that you're producing and that outcome. So it doesn't really matter which one which tech stack or architecture pattern or anything like that you use for that. It is, again, what outcome are you able to deliver by choosing particular tech stacks over another.
I think a good the reason why you'd want to use a developer experience, or why you concentrate on tooling for developer experience, is so that you can allow your developers to concentrate on the things that they care about and that they should be caring about. And I think a good developer experience based tool is going to, as you say, Sarah, support the good practice behind the scenes. I think that coming from an operations background, my sort of biased view, in spite of all my DevOps indoctrination, is that developers actually only care about cutting code and generating features. Like, that's the only thing they want to give a shit about. And that's a vast oversimplification and deeply unfair for a number of people that I've worked with. But it's still a little bit true, at least. And so good tooling for a developer should allow them not to care about the things that they don't want to care about, but because that tooling is taking care of those things for you, not because it's just hiding you from it and taking them away. You should the tooling should be allowing you to concentrate on building a product whilst having the platform take care of everything else. And what that is a boring platform, right? That tooling is therefore boring because you're commodifying all of the back end stuff that you would otherwise have to worry about. And that's where you want to be. Like, over the years, as we've been working with AWS, some of the things that we used to do and used to have to spend time on for customers are now things that we can just buy with an API call. And so those things are becoming more boring and becoming more commoditized, and getting developers to the point where they can build a lot of things without necessarily caring about that back end, but they're constrained a little bit by that tooling necessarily, because that's how that stuff works, to make sure that the back end continues to work the way it ought to.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Sara?
I was just thinking when John was talking there about the developers just wanting to cut code, and I was like, do we need to be a bit better at teaching them the business values and outputs for this stuff, and kind of making it more like a product engineer type thing? Like, just cutting code just isn't what it's all about, right? Like, we still have to add business value. So actually teaching our engineers to think a bit more like that, I think would be really beneficial.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that you go into technology expecting that you will be able to put yourself in a darkened room and churn out code for a lifetime. And the more senior you become in your career, the more you realize that actually everything's a people problem. Everything has a business context, and to be a good technologist, you have to be good at people and you have to be good at business. It's not just about pressing the plastic squares in more or less the right order, and that's a really difficult thing for some people to come to terms with. I think who've kind of been the bedroom developer who's then gone on to uni and then sort of gone into business, to the idea that you take that 15 years of experience and have to throw most of it away and go and learn how to be a people person. It's pretty hard.
Is it controversial to suggest? I think one of the things you said before, John, was that, those people that really want to innovate and want to be really bleeding edge, are they really the people that you want or need in your organization? Is it maybe the same in this case as well, as in those people that just want to cut code and stay in the darkened room and just churn out new features? Maybe they're not the people that you need either. I guess it depends on the organization that you're in.
I think you need some people like that, or at least your organization can support some people like that. But those are people who remain sort of not junior engineers, but they don't become sort of multiplier contributors. And so when it becomes time for pay rise season, if you haven't been able to act as a multiplier, and if you're not dealing with people problems or business problems or supporting others, then you are not going to be a multiplier. Then you shouldn't expect to be able to progress through the ranks of an organization or be rewarded substantially more in subsequent years, because you're not tackling the real problems.
Right. I guess that depends on the context as well. Like if you're in a really high frequency algo trading and you really need to know in depth, like and you're an individual contributor and you really need to know that, there could be a track for that, but it's really context driven.
Yeah, I think with all things, there's a balance. So like quite often you need this sort of differing opinions. So the person who wants to sort of chase after the shiny new thing, but if they've got a level of pragmatism with them, then actually their contributions can be quite valued at making sure you as a business don't stagnate. And same with the other sort of types of people. So I think generally having a mix, but if they become a domineering voice on either side of the extreme, then you're going to be in trouble.
Mm-hmm. And they can become a domineering voice, I think, because the nature of those individuals is that they are working long hours and into the night, and they are the heroes that are throwing features over the line in to hit deadlines and stuff. And poor management and sort of very sort of feature focused driven management can lead those individuals to be rewarded, and therefore those are the people that get listened to, and that's how you build platforms that don't work, essentially.
Yeah,
and then you call me and we come and pick it up. So maybe continue doing that. Yeah, whatever, fine.
There are a couple of questions here which I want to lump together. So again, I think that it's probably an ongoing theme, and they'll tie in together quite nicely. So Chris asks, when is it right to use non-boring technologies? And then Raymond also asks, do you have any suggestions around how we give teams a pathway to move tech from the new shiny to the safe tech that we'd be happy to use at the core of our stacks? So when is it right to make the new shiny choices, but also how do you move, I guess, between?
Yeah, I think they're both really...
Oh, go on, Sarah, sorry.
I think they're both really good points, but other Sarah, why don't you go first?
I'll take the first one. John kind of alluded to it, actually. It's kind of when that technology, for me anyway, when that technology is going to give you a competitive edge in some shape or form, really. Like I was speaking to somebody else the other day about it, and they said they adopted, I hadn't even thought about this angle before, but they adopted a new technology because it increased their chances of a partnership that would lead to more revenue. So that's when it's like, oh, okay, that's totally worth it. I can see exactly why you might do that. So that's my take on that question.
Yeah, effectively, I think it comes back to evaluating your current constraints and your requirements. So what outcome are you trying to optimize for? What are the current constraints that you have to, work within? And I think if we can get to a place where we're providing sort of an evaluation framework, which is appropriate for the size of your business, I think it can help empower like teams and individual developers to work out, okay, do I need to change technology choice, or actually, is this good enough for right now? I think quite often we can fall into the trap of, striving striving for perfection, and good enough is actually good enough. I know I constantly have to remind myself about that rather than making it perfect. But I think, again, the thing that helps me there is having an appropriate framework and making sure everyone's, understanding all the different areas that they need to consider when making those tech choices, and give them a forum whereby like any developer can go, you know what, I've seen this forum and I can see that we're heading to a brick wall. Can we talk about that? And then plan in that work to do a big migration from, database to database. Migration projects are definitely tricky, so I, don't love them. So if you can, again, prevent that with your good choices up front. But I think, we're never going to get away from legacy tech and having to, to fix that up.
Yeah, I think I'd quite like to provide a counterexample as to like when should you not use exciting technology for a non-technical reason. And I think that's the hiring story. That's we really want really smart people, therefore we're going to choose this esoteric thing that really smart people do, and bring a team in to work on that. So a few years ago that was Scala, right? It was a sort of we're maybe a Java shop, and we're used to running JVM languages in production and so forth, and we've got a really boring problem to solve, but it needs an amount of like smart engineering people, so let's build it in Scala and go out and hire some Scala people. And in cases that's probably worked. The problem with that is that if you're only going to be, if your hiring criteria is like we need the alpha nerds, then the thing that you're hiring for right now isn't going to be the thing that they're interested in 2 years. So, and developers who are only going to be in a business for 2 or 3 years are not making long-term decisions about maintainability. They're making short-term decisions around using the exciting, shiny things. And in some cases, the choice of the technology means that they're difficult to maintain, but also that the people and the sort of social aspect is that those people are going to move on and they're going to leave you with a bunch of stuff that now you can't hire anybody else to manage because it never took off. And so there's like a really small number of people who can do it, and they're all very expensive. So do kind of like challenge the idea that you have to hire, you have to choose a technology to make it easier to hire people. There are people out there who work in every technology, right? That you don't need to solve a hiring problem that way. The hiring problem can be solved by being a bit more visible, or having a better set of values, or looking after your team better, or providing flexible working, or any other number of things. Like it isn't about the technology. The question of like moving to something a bit more boring. I guess that migration was maybe the intent of the question, but I guess the other question might be, if I've built something that was a bit too exciting, how do I make that specific thing more boring, right? Rather than how do I get off it onto something else? And there are ways and means of doing that, I think. If you're using technology that is exciting and you've chosen that because it is a business differentiator, but that excitingness is causing you some level of operational pain, then the way that you probably benefit from that is to get involved in the community that's building this software. I'm assuming we're talking open source tools for a lot of the time. Be a driver for pushing that part of the technology landscape in a more boring direction. Fund open source developers to work on it, and prioritize things like stability features or telemetry features or better automation hooks, or adding crypto to things, or adding access control, whatever it is that you need to make it more boring. And accept, I think, that if you are choosing a non-boring technology to live at the heart of your business, you might need to do that, and so your sort of future budgets probably need to assume that might happen, and that's how you become a publicly known team player in that particular landscape. That helps your hiring as well. Right. But the migration story might be easier ultimately.
Okay. Don't forget in the audience to keep your questions coming. We still have a couple up on the screen. Just while we're waiting more questions and things to come in too, one of the things that we were discussing the other day when we were talking about this was that like how to hire without it being sexy tech, I think is what we put in our notes. And you were talking a bit slightly about that there's other things that can appeal to people. Is there any other thoughts on that then? How do you hire when it is you're predominantly working in that on the boring side of the tech? How do you make good hires still?
I think both John and Sarah mentioned, like, there's other things you can throw in there. Like, one of the things we have is our social impact mission. That's something that people are really, really looking for. There's that flexibility angle. Can you go entirely remote, or at least have some kind of flexibility around that? Is there some other cultural angles that you can work in there that might work for people, and you could almost try and tailor it to an individual basis kind of thing? There's a lot of things that you can do outside of technology. I think if somebody is adamant on looking for shiny new technology, there's not a lot you can do to swing them round. And as John mentioned, maybe it's not the right fit anyway at that point.
Yeah, I think all of those things are what I would value over, a specific tech choice. Plus, like, also, if you're, we've sort of touched on this before, we want to make sure that we're able to evolve our past decisions as new tech comes out. So I think if you're constantly just sort of putting yourself into, we be purely developing this one very niche language because we think it's going to attract more developers, you're not really setting yourselves up for success or those individuals up for success either. And so for me, it's everything we've said before, and it's about sort of showing, I guess, people that you can give them a good sense of purpose, give them a great level of autonomy, and, help sort of invest in them as well as, the company and the customer outcomes.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, nothing much to add there. I mean, free beer and foosball. I mean,
oh yeah, always.
I have lots of opinions about that too.
Yeah, the thing that I think has worked for us has been to treat our employees as human beings with needs that don't relate to work, and sort of plan how you schedule and manage the workday flexibly to support people who have caretaking commitments or families, or just don't want to work 5 days a week or whatever it is. That flexibility is one of the things that's really helped our hiring.
Cool. Okay, one of the questions up on screen from Frankie says, how does the stage of a company or a startup apply? So, for example, the decision to use Mongo to start to avoid having to create a durable schema and then often later needing to migrate to SQL, is that part of the process of a boring tech anti-pattern, is what we've said. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was a bad choice, right? I think a lot of people are... I mean, let's pick up on Mongo specifically. It's when I do my talk about this, Mongo is the example I choose because it was, I guess, formed around the time we started the consultancy, and so we've seen the life cycle of it going from kind of shiny new hacker news thing to fairly stable choice with an Amazon compatible, product replacement. I think in that case. The problem with MongoDB was that people thought that they could use it in order to avoid having to think about their data structures. And it turns out that if you're handling data, no, you can't. And ultimately, a relational database can be a better bet over and above that sort of unstructured Mongo thing, where at least then all of your schema maintenance is in one place in the well understood database, rather than done by your developers in the code, who have to then learn about backward compatible APIs and all backward compatible data structures and all sorts of stuff. So I think there was, for a lot of businesses that found themselves in that position, it's because they had chosen the wrong technology. It wasn't the right choice for them at the time. I reject the idea that as a startup you necessarily have to choose exciting, shiny stuff. I think it is not uncommon to see that because of the sort of wide-eyed and naive nature in which many of us start companies. We're also then, not especially familiar with the idea of operating a platform for a decade or something like that when we sort of start out. And so you would probably, if you form a company today and you fill it full of 25-year-old boys, then you're going to get a platform that's built entirely on the latest, shiniest stuff, no consideration for security, no consideration for operations until sort of 2 or 3 years in, and then you're going to pay a lot of money to put those pieces in, and it's going to hurt. So if you're a startup forming today, you do not have to choose lots of shiny technologies, and my view is you probably shouldn't, but you're not going to listen to me anyway, so go ahead.
I absolutely agree, John. Arguably, you should be choosing something that's stable. I think sometimes people think that that's going to be slow, and that's not true at all. Boring technologies are not slow, especially if you know exactly them inside out, right? You know everything about them. So you should be
hype,
quite quick to
the hype machine for the shiny technology is always, it's like this other thing, but it solves for this problem. And the sort of the design choices get hung up on this. Oh, but it solves for this problem. Like MongoDB is web scale. I don't have to deal with schemas, like whatever it is. And really, that's a tiny part of the problems you're going to have to solve. Problems you're going to have to solve are all about how you build revenue and run your platform effectively and keep your customers' data safe. And if you're going to go and sell to banks, like keep your customers' data really, really safe.
But I think this all comes back down to sort of picking the right tool for the right job, and picking it at the right time. So again, sort of having an evaluation criteria. I think when you're a startup, you might I guess lean towards more open source libraries or things that are free, and then you sort of bolt them together. But I think as you grow, like I don't think choosing different technologies just because you're a larger company sort of means I don't think that's a primary reason. I guess I've worked in a few companies of different size and scale, and the things that worked out best for us is when we understood what choices we were making, understood the risks that we were bringing on by choosing a particular tech over something else. So understanding that trade-off. And I think again that goes back down to what even is boring technology. We're all going to have our own differences of I like C# versus Python, all that kind of stuff. They could both be considered boring, but it's about minimizing what you don't know and maximizing what you do know. And so is it to balance what we were talking earlier about the can we be innovative while still using boring technology? It's about, okay, well, why don't we prototype something? We can still make leaps to different choices. And I think maybe in a startup you're going to be under slightly more time pressure to get to market a bit quicker. But I would say even in big organizations, I still have pressure to get to market, because otherwise we're going to stagnate.
Instagram built on AWS multiple years ago, sort of before a lot of the managed services were available. Instagram was Postgres, Python, Nginx, really sort of at the time pretty kind of disinteresting pieces of technology. All the innovation went into the iOS app and the Android app. They sold for, I can't remember what the numbers were now, some $1 billion to Facebook, and at the time had 15 engineers or something, right? If they made other choices, if they built it on MongoDB plus shiny new language, then probably that staff would have been much bigger. They'd have gone to market much slower. They might not have actually sold out to Facebook. They might have been beaten by somebody else. So don't conflate the idea of new and shiny technology with quick time to market either, because actually if you find yourself bogged down trying to solve a particular problem that relates to your specific use case that is a bit esoteric for this particular piece of technology, then you're going to be kicking yourself, right? One of the customers that we work with they work in the pharmaceutical sector, and one of their developers, with very little idea of the context they were working in, the regulatory environment, decided that the next version of the application they were building should be in Elixir and use I can't remember the name of it, but a graph database that was fairly new. And it turned out that in order for them to do that, they had to hire a consultant to write a driver for the language that they'd chosen to use the database that they were choosing. And that consultant wrote them a driver that didn't have any security stuff in it. It wasn't doing TLS. And so it wasn't suitable for their landscape at all. And they shouldn't have been spending money writing database drivers for Erlang. It's ludicrous.
I think that's one of the signals where you should possibly evaluate your tech choices. If you feel like you have to hire an external person to solve a pretty fundamental problem, maybe reconsider the strategy that you've got in play.
So is that about putting in a process as well around when you're looking to adopt technologies, being a bit better about that process and not rushing into it like, oh, let's do it. And by the time you get further down the line, you've got a consultant coming in and you're like, oh, this is way bigger than I thought it was.
There was definitely a leadership problem there. And I think the other aspect was that the leadership that was there saw this guy doing this experimentation essentially, or setting the next direction, and they left him to it because they were so frightened that he would leave because he was the only person that understood some of their other stack, right? And this is entirely a leadership failing. You shouldn't have an individual who can make unilateral decisions about the future of the platform without any idea of the business context it runs within. And you shouldn't have any one individual in your organization who is the only person who understands vast quantities of it, such that you need to keep that person around by any means necessary. That's just madness.
Yeah, and I think someone's made a really good comment in the chat as well, which we've been circling around. But like, the classic, well, big company uses this technology, so therefore it must be perfect for my needs. That's not an argument that I accept from any of my engineers when they're trying to pitch we should use this new thing.
Right.
Like, just because somebody else does it does not mean it is appropriate for our use cases.
That's like context thing, right? Don't know how big budgets, how much time, like how much effort, like what the skill sets are. It's just
The technology approach that you should adopt from other companies is the one where they are choosing the correct thing for their own context at the time. That's what you ought to do. Like slavishly adopting the Spotify model, for example, when you don't have the constraints of Spotify, or doing Kubernetes because Google did it and they're huge. No, that's not a sensible way of making those decisions.
That does lead to another question, again, that surfaced in the chat, and also something we were discussing the other day. So this is a question from Reese. It says, how do you spot when an engineer is, even perhaps unconsciously, arguing for some tech because of its non-boringness without actually saying that? Or how do you surface and resolve that kind of hidden motivation in a productive way, thinking of scenarios where I'm not a domain expert and I don't know for sure what's being advocated is boring or not, for example. I guess it's something we touched on again the other day from that leadership perspective of how do you say no to stuff? How do you lead a team that's maybe trying to push in one direction, but you want it to go another way? As a technology leader, how do you have that conversation with your teams?
I can find myself getting pulled into those conversations sometimes, and as a technologist, I can get excited about it as well. I can be like, "Ooh, yeah, no, this sounds great," and then I have to remember to kind of put my delivery hat on and my kind of business, again, back to that business impact hat on, and asking my engineers, if you were me and you had to deliver this in a set budget and a set time, which one would you pick? And keep diving and asking those questions, like, but have you thought about this? Okay, now you're adding an extra month because of this, and now I've got to go out and hire for that skill set, but it's a tiny pool and that's going to cost me a lot more money. And kind of getting them to actually walk through that process with you can really help them to actually come to the same conclusion as you. That's my process anyway.
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways you can do it. And I think this one probably does depend on like company size and scale. So like if there's a small engineering team, then I don't think you need super formal, big sort of processes or meetings to go, here's my pitch, and then, let's all evaluate it, what pros and cons. But I think the main point of what Sara is saying is it's making sure that the engineers who are sort of pitching for, whatever tech or sort of choice or strategy you're going for understand the full picture. So the full context. So the things that you might have front of mind that they may not have front of mind, trying to make that easier for everyone to rally behind. And I think it also comes back to that user first mindset. So ultimately anchoring them back to, well, why are you wanting that? Why are you advocating for that? How does this help us, solve this problem for this user in a timely, predictable, safe manner? And sort of just trying to get the customer focused front of mind as well. I find that if you can build up that level of empathy, then generally people will start realizing themselves, perhaps actually I'm choosing this for the wrong reasons, and get a more rounded picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the question is about sort of evaluation without domain knowledge, which I think is something that is tricky often for technology people, I think. But the bullshit test, right? The sniff test is, are they explaining to me in terms that I care about why you should use the thing, right? It's highly parallelized. Okay, fine. Show me where in our product do we need a highly parallel workload, right? That there's a sort of getting that person to describe their choices in terms of the things that you care about is probably the thing, and that's a good skill for engineers to learn. Incidentally, as a sort of kind of career development thing, is being able to advocate for your views based on what somebody else cares about is the sort of it's the trick to getting your own way.
Not just in tech. That's true.
Just in general, yeah.
And
I think a common conversation I've been having sort of recently is trying to get people to not worry too far into the future. So I think often, again, we can fall into the trap of going, I'm going to pick this technology choice because in some mythical time in the future, I will need to have like an insane amount of concurrent requests. And so actually it's about then going, okay, well, maybe that's true, super far in the future, but what does the next, what does our immediate need look like? What does the next 3-6 months look like? Maybe solve for that. And if we build it in a way which means that actually it can be easily replaced, on a sensible sort of strategic, let's break it down into small pieces, replace little bits, and actually we're setting ourselves up for success there as well, rather than trying to solve the problem that may never even happen. So that's a common topic.
Yeah. The other sniff test is this engineer advocating for something that replaces something that we already have? Right. If you're looking to replace something that we already have, or rewrite something in a new language, or something along those lines, that needs probably more scrutiny. Do I believe that? No, possibly not. It probably needs about the same amount of scrutiny as adding something entirely new to the stack, but replacing something that is already there working, that's maybe been there for 4 or 5 years and has accreted in its code an understanding of the business domain that you're not going to be able to transfer into another, into a rewritten version. Then you want to be very careful with that. The not invented here thing, particularly if you hire new senior engineers or you bring consultants in or whatever, like the kind of, you should replace all of this because that would trigger my my bullshit detector, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a lot of people, particularly if you're hiring rapidly, they're, having to get up to speed with unfamiliar tech, and it's unfamiliar just because, they're new to the company or whatever. Sometimes your first instinct is, I need to write all of this so I understand it. And quite often when I hear that, I'm like, okay, well, what techniques have you actually tried to understand what we have in place? How can we, incrementally make this a little bit, easier to onboard with, or whatever problem we want to optimize for? But as soon as somebody comes in or is fresh to the team and goes, everything's a disaster, I must rewrite everything instantly, alarm bells are ringing.
Cool.
I guess the other domain knowledge thing is like, we're doing this on CTO Craft, right? There are several thousand people on CTO Craft who can sort of sense check those kind of questions, right? Bring that question to the community and say, hey, my engineer's telling me that I need this. Someone will be able to dive in and say, probably not.
We've got about 10 minutes left. We've still got time for a couple of questions if you want them more quick fire. If I do the couple that we have on the screen for a little while as well, I'm sure there are any short answers. Sunil says, I would expect that older, more experienced devs are more acceptable to boring tech. Do you agree?
Probably not, actually. I think for me, it comes back down to the empathy. Like, have you built up empathy for having to be the person who wakes up at 3 a.m. because, something broke arbitrarily and then you didn't have a clue how to fix it. So I think, it can be true that more experienced developers will have a greater level of sort of empathy and preference for boring tech, but not always.
Yeah.
I'd just like to take a note then. The older part, it can be, as somebody who's in the older 50s social impact business, it's probably an experience thing rather than an age thing.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Some people have had a career that contains 15 years of experience. Some people have had a career that contains 1 year of experience repeated 15 times. And it's important to know which is the difference. And ideally, filter the latter out in your hiring process.
Interesting. Okay, another one we can answer quickly maybe is from Alpesh. It says, doesn't boring mean not having to worry about the underlying architecture and building with almost what you want? Developers not generally technical architects, and making it easy to develop their apps and making it boring is the way forward. Do you think that's true?
I'm not sure I follow that question exactly. I think that the question seems to be, should we be making life boring for developers? Like, is that what you're saying? I'm not sure. I mean, yes.
I think it's like taking away the architecture worries for developers so that they can then just concentrate on the development of the app rather than worrying about the Alpesh says yes, so I think he's agreeing that
Okay. So the platform, I guess in any situation, something that removes decisions from you can be a great thing, or it can be a bad thing. Right. Yeah. So if you're using a framework or a platform that has a lot of strong opinions about particular aspects of that, so maybe that's how you access data or how you scale or how you deploy or whatever it is, on the one hand, that can be really freeing because now you don't have to worry about any of those things. On the other hand, if your desired outcome doesn't quite fit the constraints of that platform, then you're going to be bumping against the edges of it all the time. And so I think yes, frameworks in general are great, right? The Ruby on Rails, right? That allowed a lot of developers to throw together successful web applications that made money pretty quickly by following the opinions of Rails. In many cases, once those businesses got up to a certain size or a certain number of developers or a certain kind of number of transactions, you start hitting problems like the ORM doesn't perform properly, or it's difficult to change one part of the code without having a knock-on effect somewhere else, a whole bunch of other things. So optimizing for time to market, Rails great thing to be looking at. Optimizing for kind of long-term maintainability, maybe not, but hopefully at the point at which that matters, you're making enough revenue that you can carve out the bits that need to look different and maybe turn them into services or whatever it is. So yes, frameworks make things more boring. That's probably good, but it might not be.
Yeah, I mean, I think being explicit over sort of, magic code is generally where I land on this. So, I mean, there's definitely things that I'm glad I don't actually have to have a deep knowledge about anymore, such as garbage collection. Like those things are well understood, though, and well understood and hidden, explicitly. I think when we try and be too clever, it can really trip you up a lot quicker. And then you spend even more hours trying to debug what on earth has gone on here. So it's always going to be trade-offs, but I prefer to things to be more transparent and explicit where possible.
Okay. We have only got about 5 minutes left now, just as we're wrapping up, if there's no more questions that come in. I love a war story of the what's gone wrong. So when has boring gone wrong? Who's got a 1 or 2 minute war story that can tell us something horrific?
I think for me, it was when we transitioned from being a C# house into Python. So Python was, supposed to be the better, shiny, but boring tech. And then it turns out me and a colleague, we were working on a service, and we both wrote Python differently in the same application. It was an absolute disaster. It was. I think with Python, because it has that degree of flexibility, it allows you to write in your own way, and neither of us managed to write it in proper, true Python way. But yeah, that's probably my disaster story there.
Cool. Anyone else?
I've probably got a small one. We were trying to create a automated acceptance test, and we were like, let's try and go with Cypress when everyone knew Selenium, and we spent ages doing it. I mean, we've worked it out now, but it took way longer than it needed to, and cost a lot more in people hours than it needed to. And so on reflection of that, I probably should have put my stick in the sand and said, no, we'll go with Selenium because it's tried and tested. We know what we're doing in that space.
Okay.
I guess I don't really have a lot of war stories where choosing boring things has gone wrong, and I think that's partly why I advocate for it.
It's boring, right?
Yeah. I think the thing that the angle that I do have on this is that I guess as a consultancy that's working with infrastructure and the boring things, essentially, the sort of bias that we have as tech people and the mistake that we've made, maybe more than we should have, has been to try and wrap our opinions up in a framework and sell that framework to people so that they can have our opinions about how infrastructure looks without them having to worry too much about it. And this sort of comes back to what I was saying before, which is that frameworks are good as long as the needs that you have fit in that framework. And I think that the main sort of the longest and biggest attempt that we had at building that sort of opinionated framework worked great for the first sort of 2 or 3 years, but didn't really evolve. And so the needs of the users kind of expanded outside of what we could support. And there was a lot of friction around the edges. And that caused us an amount of pain because we didn't want to add all of this kind of special case stuff to the framework. And the customers felt sort of locked in by it or constrained by it. And so we now take a very different approach, which is to say, you can have an implementation of our opinions right now, and then we'll maintain it sort of on an ongoing basis specifically for your needs rather than in this sort of framework sense. So I think we were too hasty to productize something that ultimately probably shouldn't have been productized in an attempt to make something less boring for a market segment, I guess.
Okay. Right, we've got about a minute left. I'm just posting into the chat all the contact details for the speakers today. Feel free to reach out and pick out any conversations offline. Just while I'm doing that, any final thoughts from the panel, Sarah, John, anything else you want to add?
I think for me, I'm going to repeat my original point. Customers don't care about architecture or what technology stack you effectively take. They care about the outcomes you produce and the good products that you deliver.
Cool.
Yep, I'll just repeat mine as well, Sarah, which is use whatever is going to give you the best chances of success, really.
And mine would be that everything's a people problem. So if you find that you're in a situation in your organization where things are a little bit too exciting in places where they shouldn't be, then the way to wrangle that in future is to set better context and keep an eye on the cult of personality individuals who might well be making decisions that will harm you without you really knowing what those are, for the sake of doing something new and interesting, or you might try and keep them around because they're so brilliant at everything else. Find a way to get rid of those individuals. They are pain.
Cool. Okay, anything else to add? No? Sarah, didn't you want to?
Oh, yes, sorry. We will be, thank you, Emma. We will really soon be going on a big hiring spree. So if you are looking for something in the Node, Python, AWS, React Native space, please do give us a shout at careers@restless.co.uk.
Cool. Okay, the only other thing to add is obviously thanks again to AWS for the sponsors, and CTO Craft Bytes happen regularly, so you'll see these happening all the time. But also coming up in March is another CTO Craft Con. They ran one just before Christmas that was really successful. This next one coming up is all focused on delivery, so I'm sure there'll be lots more stuff to look at in there as well. Thank you very much for your time, everybody, and see you again next time. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.